Her billionaire husband laughed on the phone and said, "Her presence irritates me. I wish she'd disappear forever." The next morning, she was gone, but what she left behind made him scream. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's family. May the Almighty wrap every woman in the light of his mercy, blessing her hands that nurture, her heart that forgives, and her soul that never gives up. You are the melody of peace, the strength behind every home, the prayer that keeps love alive when the world forgets how to care. May your days bloom with joy, your nights rest in safety, and your hearts overflow with endless grace. But my dearest family, why let silence win? One like, one comment, one spark of love can keep our bond alive. YouTube may try to dim our light, but our faith and unity will burn brighter than ever. This is Mission 1000 likes, a promise that our love cannot be hidden. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." The hallway was dark, but Natalie Williams could see everything clearly now. She stood outside the master bedroom door of the Browning estate, her bare feet silent on the marble floor, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. Through the crack in the door, she could hear Lowell's voice, low and casual, speaking into his phone with the kind of ease he never used when speaking to her. "Listen, I understand your concerns about the timeline," Lowell said, his tone almost bored. "We move forward regardless of external pressures. That is how we have always operated." There was a pause. Natalie pressed her palm against the cool wall, steadying herself, though she did not yet know why her body sensed danger before her mind could name it. Then Lowell laughed. It was a sound she had not heard in months, maybe longer. A genuine laugh, the kind that used to make her heart lift during their courtship, back when she believed she knew the man behind the expensive suits and carefully constructed smiles. Lowell's voice shifted, became almost conspiratorial, intimate in a way that made Natalie's skin prickle. "Oh, you mean Natalie? Honestly, her presence irritates me most days. She moves through this house like some kind of shadow, always there, but never actually saying anything worth hearing. I wish she would disappear forever, if I am being completely honest with you. Just vanish. Make everything simpler." The words landed like stones in deep water, each one sinking slowly, pulling her down with them. Natalie did not gasp. She did not cry out. She simply stood there, her hands still pressed against the wall, and felt something inside her go very quiet and very still. She had known, of course. Some part of her had known for months, perhaps longer. The way he looked through her at dinner parties, the way he introduced her to colleagues without using her name, just saying "my wife," as though she were a title rather than a person. The way he scheduled trips that always seemed to fall on dates that mattered to her. Birthdays and anniversaries, dissolving into empty rooms and unanswered calls. But knowing and hearing are different countries, separated by an ocean of hope. And now that ocean had drained, leaving only the bare truth of the landscape. "She does not complain," Lowell continued, and Natalie could hear him moving around the room now, probably loosening his tie, preparing for bed. "That is the one thing I will say for her. She takes up very little space, very little energy. Sometimes I forget she is even here until I see her sitting in the corner of some room, just staring at nothing. It is unsettling, actually, like living with a ghost." Natalie walked away then, her feet carrying her down the grand staircase, through the foyer, with its imported chandelier that she had once admired and now saw as just another expensive thing in a house full of expensive things that meant nothing. She walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, her hands steady, her mind moving through the conversation she had just overheard with a strange, calm clarity. She thought about the woman she had been before this marriage, a woman who painted on weekends, who laughed easily, who believed in the goodness of people even when they disappointed her. She thought about her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents died, who had taught her that love was not something you begged for, but something you offered freely and received with grace. Her grandmother had been dead for several years now, but Natalie could still hear her voice, strong and sure. Baby girl, the day you have to make yourself small to fit into someone's life is the day you need to walk away. Natalie set down the glass and walked upstairs to the guest room where she kept her personal things. The items Lowell never asked about because he never noticed them. She pulled out a leather journal she had been keeping, a chronicle of her marriage that she had started as a love letter and had slowly transformed into something else entirely. Evidence, testimony, truth. She read through the pages, her own handwriting documenting the slow erasure of herself. The first entry, written on their wedding night, was full of joy and hope. The entries that followed showed the gradual dimming of that light. The forgotten birthday, the anniversary spent alone, the dinner she had cooked that he never came home to eat, the gallery opening she had invited him to, where she stood by her paintings all evening, watching the door, waiting for him to arrive. He never came, never called. The next day, when she mentioned it, he looked at her blankly and said, "Was that this week?" The journal also contained darker truths. Entries about the night she had cried herself to sleep while he was in the next room, too absorbed in his laptop to notice her tears. Entries about the growing depression that made it hard to get out of bed some mornings. Entries about feeling like she was disappearing, becoming less real every day. And there were entries about losses he never knew about. She had been pregnant twice, miscarriages she had suffered alone in bathrooms while he was away, losses she never told him about because he had made it clear from the beginning that children would complicate the arrangement. That was how he had phrased it on their honeymoon, when she had mentioned wanting a family someday, an arrangement, as though their marriage were a negotiation rather than a union of souls. The first miscarriage had happened on a Tuesday morning. She had been alone in the house, had felt the cramping start, had known immediately what was happening. She had called him 7 times. He had not answered. She had driven herself to the emergency room, had sat in the waiting area filling out forms that asked for her spouse's information, and she had written "unavailable" in the space where his signature should have been. The second miscarriage had been worse because by then she had learned not to hope he would be there. She had simply handled it alone, quietly, the way she handled everything else in their marriage. Natalie picked up a pen and wrote one final entry in the journal, her handwriting firm and clear. "You married me to save your reputation after your previous relationship ended badly. I married you because I was fool enough to believe I could teach a stone to love. This journal contains everything you threw away without ever knowing you had it. Read it and know what you destroyed." She spent the next hours writing letters, dozens of them, addressed to different people in Lowell's life. To his mother, explaining why she was leaving and begging her not to blame herself. To Benjamin, his younger brother, telling him how much she believed in his recovery from the accident and how proud she was of his strength. To the women at the community center who had become her only real friends, thanking them for their kindness and asking them to continue their beautiful work. She packed nothing. Every piece of clothing, every piece of jewelry, every item bearing the Browning name stayed behind. She wanted nothing from this life except her freedom. The wedding ring that had felt like a promise now felt like a shackle, and she removed it with relief, setting it beside the journal. As dawn broke through the windows, painting the bedroom in shades of gold and amber, Natalie placed the journal on Lowell's pillow. She took one last look at the room where she had spent countless nights alone, waiting for a husband who never came. And then she walked out. The estate was silent. The air was cool and clean. Natalie Williams stepped through the front door and into the morning light, and with each step away from that house, she felt herself becoming real again, substantial, visible to herself if no one else. She had a plan. Money saved from paintings she had sold quietly over the past year, a friend from the community center who had agreed to help her disappear properly, a new name already chosen. A new life waiting to be built in a place where no one knew her as Lowell Browning's wife. By the time Lowell Browning woke that morning and found the journal on his pillow, Natalie was already 3 states away. And when he opened the journal and read that first entry, his screams echoed through the empty mansion, bouncing off marble and crystal and all the expensive, beautiful things that could not fill the space where a human being used to be. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. Lowell Browning had never been a man who screamed. Control was his religion, composure his armor, and the carefully cultivated image of a man who had everything together was the foundation upon which he had built his entire existence. But standing there in his bedroom, the leather journal trembling in his hands, he screamed until his throat was raw and his voice gave out completely. The first pages were almost unbearable to read. Natalie's handwriting, delicate and precise, described their wedding day from her perspective. She wrote about how handsome he had looked, waiting at the altar, how her heart had pounded with joy when he smiled at her, how she had believed in that moment that she was the luckiest woman alive. She described their honeymoon, the walks on the beach, the dinners where they talked about their dreams, the nights where they held each other, and she felt certain they could build something beautiful together. Then the entries shifted, slowly at first, like a sunset fading into dusk, and then rapidly, like a star collapsing into darkness. She wrote about the first time he missed dinner without calling, how she had cooked his favorite meal, set the table with candles, worn the dress he once said he loved, how she had waited until midnight, the food growing cold, the candles burning down to nothing. How he had come home and walked past the dining room without even noticing, going straight to his office to review documents that apparently could not wait until morning. She wrote about her birthday, which fell on a weekday, how she had hoped he might at least call during the day, maybe send flowers, how the day had passed in complete silence, how she had sat in the living room that evening alone and eaten a piece of store-bought cake by herself while watching the sun set through the windows. How she had told herself it did not matter, that birthdays were silly anyway, but how she had cried herself to sleep that night, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. She wrote about the gallery opening where she had displayed her paintings, the first time she had shown her work publicly, how she had invited him weeks in advance, how he had promised he would be there, how she had scanned the crowd all evening looking for his face, how she had stood beside her paintings and answered questions from strangers while her husband was somewhere else, doing something he deemed more important than witnessing her moment of pride and vulnerability. Entry after entry documented the small deaths of their marriage, the conversation she tried to start that he dismissed, the attempts at intimacy that he rejected because he was too tired or too stressed or too distracted, the gradual realization that she was living with someone who saw her as an obligation rather than a partner, but it was the entries about her pregnancies that destroyed him completely. The first pregnancy had lasted only a handful of weeks. She had discovered she was pregnant and had been terrified and excited in equal measure. She had planned a special dinner to tell him, had practiced what she would say, had imagined his reaction. But that was the week he had decided to extend a trip, staying away an extra several days because there were meetings that seemed important at the time. She had miscarried alone, sitting on the bathroom floor, calling his phone and getting voicemail over and over. "I lost our baby today," she had written. Our baby that he did not know existed. I called him 7 times. He did not answer. I wanted to tell him, wanted him to come home, wanted him to hold me and tell me it would be okay. But he was in meetings that could not be interrupted, according to his assistant. So I cleaned up the blood by myself and went to the emergency room alone. The nurse asked where my husband was. I lied and said he was traveling for work and could not get away. She looked at me with such pity that I wanted to disappear into the floor. When Lowell came home 5 days later, I said nothing. What would be the point? He made it clear from the beginning that children would complicate things. So I carried that loss alone, and I buried it somewhere deep where he would never have to be inconvenienced by my grief. The second pregnancy had ended the same way. Another miscarriage, another bathroom floor, another emergency room visit, another lie to medical staff about why her husband was not there. But this time, her entry was shorter, more resigned. It happened again. I knew better than to hope he would be here. I'm becoming very good at handling pain alone. I'm becoming very good at being invisible. Lowell closed the journal and vomited into the wastebasket beside his bed. When there was nothing left in his stomach, he sat on the floor, his back against the bed, and stared at nothing while his mind tried to process what he had just learned. She had been pregnant, twice, had lost both babies, had suffered through both losses completely alone, and he had not known, had not suspected, had been so thoroughly absorbed in his own world that he had missed his wife's devastation happening right under his roof. The door to the bedroom opened. His mother stood there, her face carved from stone, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "She is gone," his mother said, her voice flat and cold. "She asked me not to tell you where. She asked me to promise I would never reveal her location. And I will honor that request because she deserves at least that much loyalty from someone in this family." "Mother, I did not know about the babies," Lowell said, his voice breaking. "I did not know she was suffering like this." "You did not know because you did not look," his mother interrupted, her voice rising now, years of restrained anger finally breaking free. "You did not know because you did not care enough to ask. You did not know because you treated that beautiful, kind, generous woman like she was furniture, like she was there to be useful when you needed her and invisible when you did not. I need to find her. I need to apologize. I need to make this right." "No." His mother's voice was absolute, leaving no room for negotiation. "You need to sit in what you have done. You need to feel the full weight of destroying something precious. Finding her now, apologizing now, that would be for you, to make you feel better, to ease your guilt. She does not owe you that comfort. She does not owe you anything." His mother walked to the bed and picked up the journal. She held it against her chest like it was sacred, like it contained truths more valuable than anything in this mansion. "She loved you so completely that she became invisible," his mother said, tears streaming down her face now, her voice thick with grief and rage. "She loved you so much that she disappeared into your life until there was nothing left of her. And you were cruel enough, selfish enough, blind enough to let it happen. You let her fade away right in front of you, and you never once asked if she was okay." "I will change," Lowell said desperately. "I will find her and I will show her I can change. I will be the man she needed me to be." His mother looked at him with something like disgust, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time and was horrified by what she found. "She should not have to wait for you to change," she said quietly, her words precise and cutting. "She should not have to teach you how to be a decent human being. That is not her job. That was never her job. She gave you 3 years of her life, 3 years of chances and hope and patience. She gave you everything she had. You do not get more chances. You do not get to find her and convince her to give you another opportunity to fail her. You get to live with what you have done." His mother turned to leave, then stopped at the door and looked back at him one last time. "Natalie asked me to tell you something if you ever asked about her," his mother said. "She said to tell you that she forgives you, not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger would have kept her tied to you. She said to tell you that she hopes you learn from this, that you become better, but that she will never know if you do because she is building a life where you do not exist. She wanted you to understand that she is not hiding from you. She is simply living in a world where you are irrelevant." His mother left the room, taking the journal with her, and Lowell was alone in the vast bedroom that suddenly felt like a crypt. He pulled out his phone and tried to call Natalie's number. Disconnected. He tried her email. Bounced back. He checked her social media accounts. All deleted. She had erased herself from his reach with the same thoroughness with which she had once tried to insert herself into his life. And he understood, sitting there on the floor of his empty bedroom, that this was not a temporary departure. This was an ending. complete and final and irrevocable. The woman he had married was gone. The woman who had loved him so completely was building a new life somewhere he would never find her, and he had no one to blame but himself. Chapter 3. The Inheritance of Silence. Benjamin Browning arrived at the estate without warning 3 days after Natalie disappeared. Lowell heard the car in the driveway and assumed it was his mother returning, perhaps to deliver more painful truths, perhaps to tell him what a failure he was in new and inventive ways. He deserved all of it and more. But when he opened the door, he found his younger brother standing there, leaning heavily on his cane, his face twisted with an anger Lowell had never seen before. "Where is she?" Benjamin demanded, pushing past Lowell into the foyer with more force than his injured body should have been able to muster. "I do not know. She left. She is gone." "Good," Benjamin said, and the word was sharp enough to draw blood. "Good. She should have left you years ago. The only question is why she stayed as long as she did." Lowell stared at his brother, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Benjamin was thinner than he remembered, his shoulders slightly hunched from the injuries that had never fully healed. But there was a strength in his eyes that Lowell did not recognize, a hardness earned through suffering that Lowell had never bothered to witness. "You have something to say to me," Lowell said quietly, steeling himself for whatever was coming. "I have many things to say to you," Benjamin replied, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "But I think it would be better if you just watched this first." He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and tapped the screen several times before handing it to Lowell. A video began to play. The footage was shaky, clearly shot by someone holding a phone while trying to position it on a table or windowsill. The setting was a hospital room, sterile and white, medical equipment beeping softly in the background. And there, sitting beside a bed, was Natalie. She looked younger in the video, her face not yet carrying the weight of the loneliness Lowell had seen in her final months. She was reading aloud from a book, her voice gentle and clear, reading poetry to someone off camera. Lowell recognized the book. It was a collection by a poet Natalie loved, one she had tried to share with him once. He had dismissed it as too sentimental. The camera shifted slightly, and Lowell saw his brother lying in the hospital bed, his body thin and broken, his face gaunt with pain and depression. This was early in Benjamin's recovery, during the months when the doctors were not sure he would ever walk again, when the psychological toll of the accident had been as devastating as the physical injuries. "This is from my second week at the rehabilitation center," Benjamin said quietly, his voice tight. "Keep watching." On the screen, Natalie finished the poem and set the book down. She reached over and took Benjamin's hand, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion, but also with determination. "You are going to survive this," Natalie said on the video. "I know it does not feel that way right now. I know every day feels impossible, but you are stronger than you know, Benjamin. So much stronger than this pain. So much stronger than this fear. I do not want to be strong." Benjamin's voice came from off camera, weak and hollow, barely more than a whisper. "I want to be normal again. I want to be whole again. I want to be the person I was before this happened." "You are whole," Natalie said firmly, squeezing his hand. "Your body is healing, but you were always whole. Listen to me, Benjamin. I need you to hear this and believe it. You are not broken. You are hurt. There is a difference. Broken things cannot be fixed. Hurt things heal. You are healing. It is slow and it is painful and it is unfair, but you are healing." "Why do you come here?" Benjamin asked, his voice cracking. "You do not have to. I'm not even your real family. You barely know me." Natalie's face on the screen showed such tenderness that Lowell felt something crack open in his chest. Something that had been frozen for so long he had forgotten it could break. "You are my family," Natalie said. "Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And I come here because you matter, Benjamin. You matter so much. To your mother. To the people who care about you. To me. You matter." There was a long pause. Then Benjamin asked the question that changed everything. Does Lowell know you come here? The question hung in the air. Natalie's face changed, became carefully neutral, and she looked down at their joined hands. Your brother is very busy, she said carefully, and Lowell could hear the practiced nature of the excuse, the way she had trained herself to defend him even when he did not deserve it. He has not visited in weeks, Benjamin said, his voice bitter. He called once after the accident, once, and since then nothing. But you are here. You read to me. You sit with me during physical therapy, even though it is hard to watch. You make me believe I might actually survive this. And you are just his wife, someone he barely talks to at home. What does that say about him? Natalie was quiet for a long moment. Lowell watched her face on the screen, saw her choosing her words carefully, saw her trying to protect him, even in this private moment with his brother. It says that your brother is scared, Natalie said softly. It says that he does not know how to be present when things are hard. It says that he cares about you, but does not know how to show it. I'm making excuses for him, I know. I do that a lot. But I need you to understand something, Benjamin. His absence is not about you. It is about him, his fear, his inability to face pain. You are not lacking anything. He is. The video ended. Benjamin took the phone back and looked at Lowell with eyes that held nothing but disappointment and a deep, abiding sadness. She came to see me 3 times a week for over a year, Benjamin said, his voice barely controlled. 3 times a week. Rain, snow, holidays, it did not matter. She was there. She read to me. She did physical therapy exercises with me, so I would not have to do them alone. She brought me food from home because the hospital meals were terrible. She celebrated every tiny victory with me, like it was a miracle. Benjamin's voice broke, and he had to pause to compose himself. And you know what else? He continued. She never once told you she was coming. She never asked for credit. She never expected you to thank her or acknowledge her or even notice. She just showed up because she believed I was worth showing up for, because she understood what it meant to feel invisible, and she did not want me to feel that way too. Benjamin, I am so sorry, Lowell said, the words feeling pathetically inadequate. I should have been there. I should have been the one doing all of that. I do not want your apology, Benjamin interrupted sharply. I do not need it, and I do not care about it. What I need is for you to understand what you threw away. Natalie taught me how to live again, not just physically, but actually live. She taught me that being vulnerable is not weakness. She taught me that asking for help is brave. She taught me that the people who show up when you are broken are the only people who really matter. Benjamin moved closer to Lowell, leaning heavily on his cane, his face inches from his brother's, forcing Lowell to look directly into his eyes. You had someone who showed up, Benjamin said, his voice shaking with emotion. You had someone who loved you enough to care for the people you should have been caring for yourself. And you treated her like she was nothing, like she was invisible. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? To be invisible to the one person who is supposed to see you. I know now, Lowell whispered. I read her journal. I know what I did. You do not know, Benjamin said harshly. You cannot know because you have never been invisible. You have never had to beg for someone's attention. You have never had to make yourself smaller and quieter and less just to avoid being an inconvenience. Natalie did that for 3 years. She erased herself trying to fit into your life. And when she finally left, when she finally chose herself, you want to find her. You want to apologize? You want to fix it. Yes, Lowell said desperately. I want to fix it. Benjamin laughed, but there was no humor in it, only a bitter recognition of futility. You cannot fix it, he said. Some things once broken stay broken. And even if you could find her, even if you could apologize, it would not matter. Because you cannot give her back those 3 years. You cannot undo the loneliness. You cannot erase the nights she cried herself to sleep. You cannot make her unlose those babies. You cannot make her unfeel invisible. It is done, and she's gone. And you have to live with that for the rest of your life. Benjamin turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at his brother one last time. "She left me a letter," Benjamin said quietly. "Before she disappeared, she told me to keep living, to keep fighting, to find joy even when the world feels heavy. She said that showing up for me had helped her understand her own worth. She said that if I could survive what happened to me, then she could survive what was happening to her. She thanked me for letting her be there, as if I did her a favor by letting her save my life." Benjamin's eyes filled with tears, and he wiped them away roughly, as if angry at himself for showing this weakness. "She is the best person I have ever known," he said, his voice breaking, "and you destroyed her. Not with cruelty, not with violence, but with indifference. And that somehow feels worse, because at least cruelty acknowledges that someone exists. Indifference is erasure. You erased her, Lowell. You made her feel like she did not exist. And now she is gone, and I hope to God she is somewhere being loved the way she deserves, because she will never get that from you." Benjamin left, and Lowell stood alone in the foyer, surrounded by expensive art and imported furniture and all the symbols of success that meant absolutely nothing in the face of what he had lost. Chapter 4. The Reckoning of Regret. The key was taped inside the back cover of Natalie's journal, hidden between pages his mother had carefully removed before showing him the rest. She had finally given him the complete journal a week after Benjamin's visit, along with the key and a simple note in her handwriting. "She wanted you to find this eventually. It is the last piece." The key had a number stamped on it and an address written in Natalie's careful handwriting. A storage facility in a part of town Lowell had never visited, tucked between an industrial park and a row of buildings that looked abandoned. He drove there early in the morning, when the city was still grey and quiet, when he could pretend for a few moments that the world had not fundamentally shifted beneath his feet. The facility manager was an elderly woman who looked at him with knowing, sad eyes when he showed her the key. She did not ask questions. She did not offer sympathy. She simply pointed him down a long corridor lined with identical metal doors, each one hiding someone's secrets, or someone's forgotten past, or someone's carefully preserved memories. Unit 47. He stood in front of it for a long time before he could bring himself to open the lock. His hands shook as he turned the key, as he pulled the door open, as he stepped inside. The space was small and climate-controlled, filled with boxes stacked neatly against the walls. Everything was labeled in Natalie's handwriting, each label like a chapter title in the story of a life he had never bothered to read. Wedding photographs, courtship letters, medical records, future dreams, personal writings. The labels themselves were like a map of a marriage he had never actually participated in. He opened the box, labeled Wedding Photographs first. Inside were hundreds of pictures he had never seen, moments captured by the photographer that had never made it into the official album. In these photos, Natalie was luminous, glowing with a happiness so pure it was almost painful to witness. She looked at him in almost every shot, her face turned toward him, her eyes following him even when he was not looking at her. And in every photograph where they stood together, Lowell could see the heartbreaking difference in their expressions. She looked at him like he was her entire world, like he contained all the joy and possibility of her future. He looked at the camera, at the guests, at everything and everyone, except her. There was one photograph that stopped him completely. They were dancing, presumably their first dance as husband and wife. Natalie was looking up at him with such radiant love that it seemed impossible she could contain it all. And he was looking over her shoulder at something beyond the frame, his face pleasant but distant, already somewhere else, even in that moment that should have been sacred. The next box contained letters, not the journal entries he had already read, but drafts of letters she had written to him and never sent. He pulled them out one by one, his hands trembling, his heart breaking with each new revelation. "Dear Lowell, I know you are busy, but I wanted to tell you about something that happened today. I sold my first painting. A woman came into the gallery and stood in front of it for 20 minutes, and then she bought it. She said it made her feel less alone. I wish you had been there to celebrate with me. I wish I could share this joy with you. But you are traveling again, and I know you have important things to handle, so I will keep this happiness to myself and hope that someday there will be space for my small victories in your life. I love you. I am proud of you. I hope someday you might be proud of me too. The letter was dated from over 2 years ago. He had been traveling that week for meetings he could barely remember now. Meetings that had seemed crucial at the time, but were now just blank spaces in his memory. She had sold her first painting, a milestone that should have been celebrated with champagne and dancing and joy, and he had not even known it happened. Another letter. This one shorter, more desperate, the handwriting less controlled. Lowell, I am trying so hard to understand you. I am trying to be patient. I am trying to believe that your distance is not about me, that it is just who you are, that I should not take it personally. But I am running out of ways to explain your absence to myself. I'm running out of reasons to stay. Please, if you care at all, give me a sign. Give me something to hold on to. Give me a reason to believe that I matter to you. He could not remember anything about the week that letter was written. He could not place where he had been or what he had been doing that was more important than the woman who was slowly drowning in their marriage. There were dozens of these letters, each one documenting a moment when she had reached out to him across the growing distance between them. Each one never sent because she had learned that reaching out only led to more pain. The box labeled medical records made him physically ill. Inside were documents from the hospital visits after her miscarriages, emergency room intake forms, discharge instructions, follow-up appointment reminders, bills all paid from her personal account, all bearing her name alone, no spouse listed, no emergency contact except for his mother's number. He spread the documents out on the floor of the storage unit, creating a timeline of her suffering. The first miscarriage had happened on a Tuesday. She had been admitted to the emergency room in the early afternoon. The notes indicated she had driven herself there. She had been treated and released the same day with instructions to follow up with her doctor. She had been alone through all of it. The second miscarriage had happened on a weekend, late at night. The emergency room notes were longer this time, more detailed. Patient appears emotionally distressed. Patient refused to call family members when offered phone access. Patient states she prefers to handle this privately. Recommend counseling follow-up. There were also therapy intake forms he had not known about. She had started seeing a therapist about a year into their marriage. The initial assessment form asked her to describe her primary concerns. In her neat handwriting, she had written, "I feel invisible. My husband does not see me. I'm not sure I exist anymore." Lowell sat on the concrete floor, surrounded by evidence of her pain, and wept. The box labeled future dreams nearly destroyed him. Inside were sketches and plans for a life they never lived. She had designed a nursery, drawn in careful detail with measurements and color swatches and furniture placement. Yellow walls with white trim, a rocking chair by the window, a mobile with stars and moons. She had even sketched what the view would look like from the rocking chair, as if she had spent hours sitting in that empty room, imagining rocking a baby that never came. There was a wedding dress design, beautiful and intricate, with a note attached. "For our vow renewal, I want to marry him again, to remind both of us why we started this journey. I want to stand in front of our family and friends and promise again to love him, to be patient with him, to believe in the man I know he can become." He checked the date on the note. It had been written just before their 3rd anniversary, the anniversary he had completely forgotten, the one he had worked through without even realizing the date. Among the dream boxes, he found notebooks filled with her writings, poetry she had written about loneliness, short stories about women who disappeared, essays about what it means to love someone who cannot love you back. Her talent was evident on every page, her voice strong and clear and heartbreakingly honest. This was a side of her he had never known existed. a whole inner world she had built because the outer world of their marriage was too barren to sustain her. At the bottom of the storage unit, he found one more box. This one was labeled simply Hopes. Inside were ticket stubs from movies she had gone to alone, hoping he would come home in time to join her. Restaurant reservation confirmations for dinners she had planned and he had missed. Brochures for trips she had wanted to take together, a marriage counseling business card she had picked up but never had the courage to suggest they use. And there was a single photograph, different from all the wedding photos. This one was taken recently, maybe just weeks before she left. She was standing in their kitchen, and she must have set the camera on a timer because she was alone in the frame. She was not smiling. She was not crying. She was simply looking at the camera with eyes that held nothing but exhaustion and resignation. On the back of the photo, in her handwriting, "This is what disappearing looks like." Lowell gathered all the boxes, all the evidence of the life she had tried to build with him, the life he had been too blind and too selfish to participate in. He sat there in that storage unit as the morning turned to afternoon, reading every letter, looking at every photograph, understanding too late what he had destroyed. When he finally left, he locked the door, but kept the key, not because he had any right to these memories, but because he needed to remember. He needed to carry the weight of what he had done. Chapter 5. The Cost of Blindness. 6 months had passed since Natalie disappeared, and Lowell was no longer the man he had been. The estate was gone, sold to pay debts and settle accounts he had been too distracted to manage properly. The luxury cars were gone. The designer clothes were gone. He lived now in a modest apartment in a neighborhood where no one knew his name, where he could walk to the corner store without being recognized as the man who had once been important. His relationship with his mother had thawed slightly, though she still carried the weight of her disappointment like a stone. They spoke on the phone occasionally, brief conversations about practical matters, never about Natalie, never about feelings. His mother had made it clear that while she would not cut him out of her life completely, he had forfeited the right to her warmth, to her easy affection, to the unconditional love she had once given so freely. Benjamin visited sometimes, usually unannounced, appearing at Lowell's door with groceries or books, or just the gift of his presence. They did not talk much during these visits. Benjamin would help Lowell organize his small apartment, would share a meal with him, would sit in comfortable silence while they both avoided the ghost that haunted every conversation. Benjamin's forgiveness was slower in coming, more tentative, built on cautious observations of whether Lowell's change was real or performed. Lowell had started working at a non-profit that helped low-income families with legal aid. The work was humbling, the pay was minimal, and every day he came face to face with people whose struggles made his own suffering feel small and self-inflicted. But the work gave him purpose, gave him a reason to get up in the morning, gave him a way to contribute something useful to the world. One afternoon, as Lowell was leaving the non-profit office, he decided to walk past the community center where his mother volunteered, the center that Natalie had loved so much. He had avoided the place since she left, unable to face the women who had known her, who had loved her, who would rightfully blame him for her absence. But today, something compelled him forward. Perhaps it was the changing season, the way the autumn light made everything feel both beautiful and melancholy. Perhaps it was the weight of 6 months of solitude finally becoming too heavy to carry alone. Perhaps he simply needed to be in a place where she had been happy, even if that happiness had been built in the spaces outside their marriage. He stood outside the community center for a long time, watching through the windows as people came and went, as children played in the recreation room, as elderly women gathered around tables to share meals and conversation. Finally, he gathered his courage and walked inside. His mother was not there, but other women were, women he vaguely recognized from the handful of times he had accompanied Natalie to volunteer events. Events he had found tedious, where he had spent most of his time checking his phone and counting the minutes until he could leave. One woman, elderly and sharp-eyed, recognized him immediately. She stood up from the table where she had been sorting donations and walked toward him with purpose. "You are Lowell Browning," she said, her voice carrying no warmth, only statement of fact. "I am," he admitted, bracing himself for whatever was coming. "Where is Natalie?" The question felt like a physical blow, even though he had known it was coming. "She left me. She is gone." The woman nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had always suspected. Her name was Opal, he remembered now. She had been one of Natalie's closest friends here. "Come with me," Opal said, and she led him to a back room where several other women were organizing supplies. "This is Lowell Browning," she announced to the group. Natalie's husband. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The women stopped what they were doing and turned to look at him. Their faces showed a range of emotions: pity, disgust, anger, sadness. But no one looked surprised. They had known this day would come. One woman stood and walked toward him. "You have some nerve coming here," she said quietly. "I just wanted to see the place that mattered to her," Lowell said weakly. "This place mattered to her because she mattered here," Opal said, her voice firm. "She mattered because we saw her. We listened to her. We valued her, unlike her husband who treated her like she was invisible." "I know," Lowell said. "I know what I did." "You do not know," another woman interjected sharply. "You were not there when she sat in Opal's kitchen crying because she felt like a ghost in her own home. You were not there when she showed up to help at our events, even though she could barely hold herself together, because helping others was the only thing that made her feel human. You were not there when she stood in this very room and told us she did not know how much longer she could keep living in a marriage where she did not exist." Lowell felt the floor tilt beneath him. These women had known. They had seen what he had refused to see. They had witnessed her suffering while he had remained oblivious. "Natalie used to come to my house late at night sometimes," Opal said, her voice softer now, but no less serious. "She would show up at my door looking lost, and I would make her tea and let her talk. She told me about you, about how hard she tried to make you see her, about how many different versions of herself she attempted, thinking maybe if she was quieter, or more present, or less needy, or more independent, maybe then you would notice her." Another woman spoke up. "She taught my granddaughter to paint. My granddaughter was failing school, getting into trouble, feeling worthless. Natalie saw her here one day and just started talking to her about art. She spent hours teaching her, bought her supplies with her own money. Now my granddaughter is thriving, and it is because Natalie saw her potential when no one else did. Natalie knew what it felt like to be overlooked, so she made sure other people felt seen." A third woman added, "She volunteered here every week. She organized our food drives, helped with legal paperwork for immigrant families, ran art classes for the children. She gave so much of herself to this place. And you know what she told us once? She said that helping here was the only time she felt real. The only time she felt like she had value." Opal pulled out her phone and showed Lowell a photograph. In it, Natalie was surrounded by young girls, all of them holding paintings they had created, all of them smiling at the camera. Natalie was smiling too, but Lowell could see the sadness behind her eyes, the loneliness that no amount of giving to others could fully erase. "She used to sit in my kitchen after these classes," Opal said, her voice gentle now, almost tender with memory. "She would drink tea and tell me about her marriage. She said she felt like she was disappearing. She said she would look in the mirror and not recognize herself anymore. She said she was becoming smaller and quieter every day, trying to take up less space so you would not find her presence irritating." "I said that," Lowell whispered, the memory of that phone call crushing him again. "I said her presence irritated me." "We know," Opal said. "She told us what she overheard. She came here the morning after, and she told us she was leaving. She said she was going to give you what you wanted. She was going to disappear. We tried to convince her to stay nearby, another woman said. We told her she had a community here, people who loved her. But she said she needed to go somewhere completely new, somewhere you could never find her, somewhere she could remember what it felt like to exist without apologizing for it. Lowell looked around at these women, these strangers who had loved his wife better than he had, who had seen her value when he had been blind to it. Is she happy? He asked, his voice breaking. Do you know if she's happy now? The women exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Opal spoke. We do not know where she is. She cut ties with all of us to make sure you could never trace her through us. But about 4 months ago, we received a letter. No return address, postmarked from a city none of us recognized. She said she was building a new life. She said she was painting again. She said she was learning to take up space without feeling guilty about it. She said she was happy. Lowell closed his eyes, and tears streamed down his face. I'm glad, he managed to say. I am glad she escaped me. Opal studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes seeing past his tears to whatever truth lay beneath. What are you going to do now? She asked. I do not know, Lowell admitted. I do not know how to live with what I have done. I do not know how to be better when the person I hurt most is gone, and I cannot make amends. You become better anyway, Opal said firmly. Not for her, not to win her back, because that ship has sailed and sunk, but because wasting the lesson she taught you would make her suffering meaningless. You become the man she needed you to be, even though she will never see it. You help other people the way you should have helped her. You make sure no other woman suffers what she suffered because her husband was too blind to see her. The other women nodded, a chorus of agreement. Now leave, Opal said, and though her tone was not unkind, it was absolute. This is her space, not yours. If you want to honor her memory, do it somewhere else. Build something that matters, but do not come back here expecting us to comfort you or absolve you. We loved her. We still love her. And we will never forgive you for driving away someone so precious. Lowell nodded and turned to leave. As he walked toward the door, Opal called after him. Lowell, she said, and he turned back. She did not hate you, even at the end. She was sad about you, disappointed, hurt beyond measure. But she did not hate you. She just finally loved herself more than she loved you. Remember that. It might help. Lowell walked out of the community center and into the afternoon light, and he understood that this was his life now. To carry the weight of what he had done, to never be forgiven by the people who mattered most, to change anyway, not for redemption, but because anything else would be another betrayal. Chapter 6. The Discovery of Patterns. Lowell sat in the therapist's office for the first time on a gray Tuesday when the world felt especially heavy. The office was small and unpretentious, with comfortable furniture and walls lined with books. The therapist was a woman in her 60s named Dr. Eleanor Hayes, who had been recommended by the non-profit where he worked. She had kind eyes but a directness that made it clear she would not tolerate evasion or self-pity. Tell me why you are here, Dr. Hayes said after they had settled into their chairs. My wife left me, Lowell said. I destroyed my marriage through neglect and indifference. I made her feel invisible until she disappeared. I need to understand why I did that. I need to understand how I became the kind of man who could hurt someone I claimed to love. Dr. Hayes nodded, making a note. That is a good start. Self-awareness is the first step. But I want to be clear with you from the beginning. Therapy is not about making you feel better. It is about making you better. Those are not the same thing. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Lowell said. I do not deserve to feel better, but I need to change. I need to make sure I never do this to anyone else. Over the following months, Dr. Hayes helped Lowell excavate the patterns that had led to his failure as a husband. They talked about his father, a man who had built his company from nothing but who had never shown affection, who had taught Lowell that emotion was weakness, that success was the only metric of value, that relationships were transactions to be managed rather than bonds to be nurtured. Your father taught you that love was conditional, Dr. Hayes said during one session. He gave you approval when you achieved, withdrew it when you failed. You learned that your worth was contingent on your performance, and you applied that same logic to your marriage. You thought that providing financially, being successful, maintaining the structure of a marriage was enough. You did not understand that love requires presence, attention, emotional availability. They talked about his relationship with his mother, a woman who had sacrificed everything for her family, but who Lowell had taken for granted. You watched your mother make herself small, Dr. Hayes observed. You watched her sublimate her own needs for the sake of your father and you children. And you internalized that as normal. You expected Natalie to do the same thing. When she tried to assert her own needs, you saw it as demanding rather than healthy. They talked about his fear of vulnerability, his use of work as a shield against intimacy, his inability to be present with discomfort or pain. You avoid difficult emotions, Dr. Hayes said. When your brother was injured, you could not face his suffering, so you disappeared. When Natalie tried to express her needs, you dismissed them because engaging with her pain would have required you to be vulnerable yourself. You have spent your whole life running from feeling, and in the process, you taught yourself not to see the feelings of others. The sessions were brutal. Dr. Hayes did not let him hide behind excuses or rationalizations. She made him examine every defense mechanism, every pattern of avoidance, every way he had constructed his life to protect himself from the very intimacy he claimed to want. The irony, Dr. Hayes said, is that you married Natalie because she made you feel safe. She loved you unconditionally. She asked for so little. She made herself small enough to fit into your life without requiring you to change. And that is exactly why you were able to hurt her so profoundly. She gave you everything, and you mistook her generosity for an endless resource that required no reciprocation. Lowell started attending a support group for men working to change patterns of emotional neglect. The group met weekly in a church basement, a circle of uncomfortable chairs filled with uncomfortable men, all of them carrying the weight of relationships they had damaged or destroyed. The facilitator was a man named Thomas, who had lost his own family to his emotional absence. He did not preach or lecture. He simply created space for men to tell their stories and hear themselves in others. I thought I was a good husband, one man shared during a meeting. I never cheated. I never hit her. I provided a good life, but she left anyway. And when she explained why, she said I had made her feel like she was invisible. I still do not fully understand what that means. How can someone be invisible when they are standing right in front of you? Another man responded, it means you looked at her but did not see her. It means you heard her words but did not listen to what she was saying. It means she could be crying in the next room and you would not notice because you were too focused on your own internal world. I know because I did the same thing. Lowell shared his own story at these meetings, detailing his failures with unflinching honesty. He talked about the phone call Natalie overheard. He talked about the miscarriages she suffered alone. He talked about Benjamin's rehabilitation that he ignored while Natalie showed up every week. He talked about the journal and the storage unit and the community center women who had known his wife was suffering while he remained oblivious. How do you live with it? A younger man asked him once. How do you get up every day knowing what you did? You just do, Lowell answered honestly. You get up because staying in bed is just another form of selfishness. You get up because maybe, if you learn from your mistakes, you can help someone else avoid them. You get up because the alternative is wasting the lesson she taught you by leaving. One evening after a group meeting, Thomas pulled Lowell aside. You are doing good work here, Thomas said. Your honesty is helping other men face their own patterns. Have you thought about speaking more publicly? There are organizations that work on preventing emotional abuse. They are always looking for people willing to share their stories from the perspective of the person who caused the harm. I do not know, Lowell said hesitantly. It feels self-serving somehow, like I am trying to make myself the hero of a redemption story. You will never be the hero, Thomas said bluntly, but you can be a cautionary tale. You can be the voice that says, here is what it looks like when you fail someone completely. Here is the cost. Here is why you should not make my mistakes. That has value. Lowell thought about this conversation for weeks. Finally, he reached out to an organization that Simone had mentioned, one that worked with survivors of emotional abuse. He offered to speak at their workshops, to share his perspective as someone who had perpetrated the kind of harm they were helping women escape. The first time he spoke publicly was terrifying. He stood in front of a room full of women, many of them survivors of marriages that mirrored what he had done to Natalie. He told them his story without softening it, without making himself sympathetic, without asking for forgiveness. I am not here to be redeemed, he told them. I'm here to be honest. I destroyed my wife through systematic emotional neglect. I made her invisible through indifference, and she left me because staying would have killed her. I'm sharing this not because I deserve your sympathy, but because seeing the face of the person who causes this harm might help you trust your own instincts when you see these patterns in your own lives. The women asked hard questions. Did you know you were hurting her? One woman asked. Or were you really that oblivious? Both, Lowell answered. On some level, I knew she was unhappy. But I told myself it was not that bad. I told myself she was being oversensitive. I told myself that I was a good husband because I provided financial security. I used those lies to avoid looking at the truth, which was that I was slowly killing her spirit. Another woman asked, do you think you can change? Really change, not just perform change? I do not know, Lowell said honestly. I am trying. I am in therapy. I am in support groups. I'm examining every pattern that led to my failure. But I will never know if the change is real because she is gone. I do not get to test myself with her. I do not get to prove I am better. I just have to do the work and hope that it makes a difference for someone else. After the talk, several women approached him. One woman said, thank you for not making yourself the victim. So many men who hurt us try to claim they were the real victims of the situation. You owned what you did. That matters. Another woman said quietly, I think my husband is like you were. He does not mean to hurt me, but I am disappearing. Hearing you describe what you did, it is like hearing my life described. I think I need to leave before I disappear completely. Lowell looked at her and said, if you are disappearing, then yes, leave. Do not wait for him to change. Do not sacrifice yourself hoping he will finally see you. Save yourself. On the drive home that night, Lowell felt something shift inside him. He was not redeemed, he was not forgiven, but he was useful. His failure, horrible as it was, could serve as a warning to others, and that was something, even if it was not enough. Chapter 7. The Price of Awakening. Lowell sat in Dr. Eleanor Hayes's office for the first time on a grey Tuesday when the world felt especially heavy. The office was small and unpretentious, with comfortable furniture and walls lined with books. Dr. Hayes was a woman in her 60s who had been recommended by the non-profit where he worked. She had kind eyes, but a directness that made it clear she would not tolerate evasion or self-pity. Tell me why you are here, Dr. Hayes said after they had settled into their chairs. My wife left me, Lowell said. I destroyed my marriage through neglect and indifference. I made her feel invisible until she disappeared. I need to understand why I did that. I need to understand how I became the kind of man who could hurt someone I claimed to love. Dr. Hayes nodded, making a note. That is a good start. Self-awareness is the first step. But I want to be clear with you from the beginning. Therapy is not about making you feel better. It is about making you better. Those are not the same thing. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Lowell said. I do not deserve to feel better, but I need to change. I need to make sure I never do this to anyone else. Over the following months, Dr. Hayes helped Lowell excavate the patterns that had led to his failure as a husband. They talked about his father, a man who had built his company from nothing but who had never shown affection, who had taught Lowell that emotion was weakness, that success was the only metric of value, that relationships were transactions to be managed rather than bonds to be nurtured. "Your father taught you that love was conditional," Dr. Hayes said during one session. "He gave you approval when you achieved, withdrew it when you failed. You learned that your worth was contingent on your performance, and you applied that same logic to your marriage. You thought that providing financially, being successful, maintaining the structure of a marriage was enough. You did not understand that love requires presence, attention, emotional availability." They talked about his relationship with his mother, a woman who had sacrificed everything for her family, but who Lowell had taken for granted. "You watched your mother make herself small," Dr. Hayes observed. "You watched her sublimate her own needs for the sake of your father and you children. And you internalized that as normal. You expected Natalie to do the same thing. When she tried to assert her own needs, you saw it as demanding rather than healthy." They talked about his fear of vulnerability, his use of work as a shield against intimacy, his inability to be present with discomfort or pain. "You avoid difficult emotions," Dr. Hayes said. "When your brother was injured, you could not face his suffering, so you disappeared. When Natalie tried to express her needs, you dismissed them, because engaging with her pain would have required you to be vulnerable yourself. You have spent your whole life running from feeling, and in the process, you taught yourself not to see the feelings of others." The sessions were brutal. Dr. Hayes did not let him hide behind excuses or rationalizations. She made him examine every defense mechanism, every pattern of avoidance, every way he had constructed his life to protect himself from the very intimacy he claimed to want. "The irony," Dr. Hayes said, "is that you married Natalie because she made you feel safe. She loved you unconditionally. She asked for so little. She made herself small enough to fit into your life without requiring you to change. And that is exactly why you were able to hurt her so profoundly. She gave you everything, and you mistook her generosity for an endless resource that required no reciprocation." Lowell started attending a support group for men working to change patterns of emotional neglect. The group met weekly in a church basement, a circle of uncomfortable chairs filled with uncomfortable men, all of them carrying the weight of relationships they had damaged or destroyed. The facilitator was a man named Thomas, who had lost his own family to his emotional absence. He did not preach or lecture. He simply created space for men to tell their stories and hear themselves in others. "I thought I was a good husband," one man shared during a meeting. "I never cheated. I never hit her. I provided a good life, but she left anyway. And when she explained why, she said I had made her feel like she was invisible. I still do not fully understand what that means. How can someone be invisible when they are standing right in front of you?" Another man responded, "It means you looked at her but did not see her. It means you heard her words but did not listen to what she was saying. It means she could be crying in the next room and you would not notice, because you were too focused on your own internal world. I know because I did the same thing." Lowell shared his own story at these meetings, detailing his failures with unflinching honesty. He talked about the phone call Natalie overheard. He talked about the miscarriages she suffered alone. He talked about Benjamin's rehabilitation that he ignored while Natalie showed up consistently. He talked about the journal and the storage unit and the community center women who had known his wife was suffering while he remained oblivious. "How do you live with it?" a younger man asked him once. "How do you get up every day knowing what you did?" "You just do," Lowell answered honestly. "You get up because staying in bed is just another form of selfishness. You get up because maybe, if you learn from your mistakes, you can help someone else avoid them. You get up because the alternative is wasting the lesson she taught you by leaving." One evening after a group meeting, Thomas pulled Lowell aside. "You are doing good work here," Thomas said. Your honesty is helping other men face their own patterns. Have you thought about speaking more publicly? There are organizations that work on preventing emotional abuse. They are always looking for people willing to share their stories from the perspective of the person who caused the harm. I do not know, Lowell said hesitantly. It feels self-serving somehow, like I am trying to make myself the hero of a redemption story. You will never be the hero, Thomas said bluntly, but you can be a cautionary tale. You can be the voice that says, here is what it looks like when you fail someone completely. Here is the cost. Here is why you should not make my mistakes. That has value. Lowell thought about this conversation for weeks. Finally, he reached out to an organization that worked with survivors of emotional abuse. He offered to speak at their workshops, to share his perspective as someone who had perpetrated the kind of harm they were helping women escape. A few weeks later, a young woman named Simone contacted him. She worked at a non-profit supporting survivors, and she wanted to meet with him before he spoke at any of their events. They met at a coffee shop near Lowell's apartment. Simone was direct and cautious, her eyes assessing him carefully as they sat down. I need to show you something, Simone said after they had ordered. Your wife made a donation to our organization before she left. A significant donation. In her letter accompanying it, she wrote about her own experience. Simone handed Lowell a copy of the letter. His hands trembled as he read Natalie's words. I am donating this money because I know what it feels like to disappear slowly in a marriage where love is one-sided. I know what it feels like to make yourself smaller and quieter, hoping that if you take up less space, maybe your partner will finally notice the space you do occupy. I know what it feels like to lose yourself so completely that you look in the mirror and do not recognize the person staring back. I'm leaving my marriage. I'm choosing myself. And I hope this money helps other women make that same choice before they lose themselves entirely. You do not have to be hit to be hurt. You do not have to be yelled at to be diminished. Emotional erasure is real, and it can destroy you just as surely as any physical violence. Choose yourself. Choose your own visibility. Choose life. Lowell read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Even in her deepest pain, even as she was planning her escape, Natalie had thought about other women suffering similar fates. She had transformed her pain into help for strangers. We have helped over 200 women in the past year, Simone said quietly. Women leaving emotionally abusive situations. Women who needed money for security deposits. Women who needed therapy. Women who needed legal help. All because of your wife's donation and her bravery in naming what she experienced. She saved herself and saved others in the process, Lowell said, his voice breaking. Yes, Simone agreed. And I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to understand that her pain was not meaningless. She transformed it into something powerful. And I wanted to see if you were serious about your own transformation before I let you speak to the women we serve. I am serious, Lowell said. I will do whatever I can to help prevent other women from suffering what she suffered. Over the following months, Lowell spoke at workshops and support groups, sharing his story without softening it, without making himself sympathetic, without asking for forgiveness. His message was consistent. Change is possible, but it requires complete honesty, consistent action, and the understanding that growth does not erase harm or entitle you to forgiveness. The work was difficult and often painful. He regularly spoke to rooms full of women who looked at him with justified anger and suspicion. He regularly heard stories that mirrored what he had done to Natalie. Stories of women who had made themselves invisible, trying to please partners who could not see them. His relationship with Benjamin continued to heal slowly. They met for dinner regularly now, real conversations where they talked about substantive things instead of just exchanging pleasantries. Benjamin had returned to school, was studying architecture, was building a life defined by what he wanted rather than what his injuries had taken from him. One evening during dinner, Benjamin set down his fork and looked at Lowell with an expression that was both tender and sad. "I heard from Natalie," Benjamin said quietly. "She wrote me a long letter, no return address, postmarked from somewhere I did not recognize. She wanted me to know she is doing well. She has her own life now, her own work, her own people who value her." Lowell felt his chest tighten. "That is good. I am glad she is happy. There is more," Benjamin continued. "She asked me to tell you something. She said that what you did to her nearly destroyed her, but it did not. She said she has forgiven you, not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger would keep her tied to who she was in that marriage. She said her forgiveness is not an invitation. It is her release. She is releasing you from her anger so she can be fully free, and she is releasing you from guilt so you can do the work that needs to be done." Benjamin paused, his voice becoming firmer. "She also said that if your transformation helps even one woman leave before she loses herself completely, then maybe all the pain meant something. But she was very clear, Lowell. She is never coming back. She has built a life without you, and she deserves to keep it. She wanted you to know she's thriving, and she wanted you to let that be enough." "Did she say where she is?" Lowell asked, even though he knew the answer. "No, and I would not tell you if she did," Benjamin said firmly. "She has earned her peace. She has earned her distance from you." "I know," Lowell said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just needed to know she is more than surviving, that she is actually happy." "She is," Benjamin confirmed. "Happier than she ever was with you, and that needs to be your comfort." After Benjamin left, Lowell sat alone in his apartment and absorbed the weight of Natalie's message. She had forgiven him, but the forgiveness came with distance, with boundaries, with the clear understanding that she had moved on so completely that he no longer existed in her daily life, except as a lesson learned. He pulled out his journal and wrote one final letter to her, knowing she would never read it, but needing to write it anyway. "Dear Natalie, Benjamin told me about your letter. Thank you for the gift of your forgiveness, even though I know I do not deserve it. Thank you for releasing me so I can do this work without the crushing weight of guilt making me useless. Thank you for being brave enough to transform your pain into help for others. I promise you that I will spend the rest of my life making sure your suffering was not in vain. I will help men understand what emotional neglect really costs. I will help women understand they have the right to leave before they disappear. I will carry you with me always, not as a fantasy of what I lost, but as a reminder of what matters. Thank you for surviving me. That is the greatest gift you could have given anyone." He closed the journal and sat in the quiet of his apartment, understanding that this was his path now. Not redemption, but purpose. Not forgiveness earned, but forgiveness given freely by someone who no longer needed him to suffer for her to be free. Chapter 8. The Revelation of Worth. A full year had passed since Natalie disappeared, and Lowell's life had transformed into something unrecognizable from what it had been. He lived simply now, his small apartment containing only what he needed. His days structured around work that mattered and relationships he was learning to maintain with real presence and attention. His relationship with his mother had warmed considerably. She had seen the consistency of his change, had watched him show up week after week to volunteer at the community center, had observed him speaking with the elderly women there with genuine interest and respect. She still carried disappointment in her eyes when she looked at him, but there was also something else now. Perhaps not pride, but recognition that he was trying, that the transformation was real. They had dinner together once a week now, and during these dinners they talked about things they had never discussed before. His childhood, her marriage to his father, the ways patterns get passed down through generations if no one has the courage to break them. "Your father was a good provider," his mother said during one dinner, "but he was not a good partner. I loved him, but I was lonely in that love. I watched him build his empire while I built our home, and I told myself that was enough. That his success was our success. That my sacrifice was noble. But the truth is, I disappeared into his life the same way Natalie disappeared into yours. I just never had the courage to leave. I'm sorry, Lowell said. I'm sorry you felt invisible too. I'm sorry I learned from his example instead of from your pain. You are learning now, his mother said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. That is what matters. You are breaking the pattern. That takes courage. Benjamin visited more frequently now, their relationship rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and real connection. Benjamin was thriving at school, his architectural designs winning awards, his professors seeing potential in him that went beyond his physical limitations. He had started dating someone, a woman he had met in one of his classes, and he talked about her with a joy that made Lowell both happy and wistful. She sees me, Benjamin said about his girlfriend. Not my injuries, not my limitations, just me. It is the most incredible feeling, being truly seen by someone you care about. Lowell thought about how Natalie had seen him, had seen past his defenses to the broken, frightened man underneath, and how he had repaid that gift by refusing to see her at all. One afternoon, a young woman named Simone appeared at the non-profit where Lowell worked. She had contacted him a few weeks earlier, asking to meet, explaining that she worked for an organization supporting survivors of emotional abuse. I need to show you something, Simone said, sitting across from him in the small conference room. Your wife made a donation to our organization before she left. A significant donation. In her letter accompanying the donation, she wrote about her own experience. Simone handed Lowell a copy of the letter. His hands trembled as he read Natalie's words. I am donating this money because I know what it feels like to disappear slowly in a marriage where love is one-sided. I know what it feels like to make yourself smaller and quieter, hoping that if you take up less space, maybe your partner will finally notice the space you do occupy. I know what it feels like to lose yourself so completely that you look in the mirror and do not recognize the person staring back. I'm leaving my marriage. I'm choosing myself. And I hope this money helps other women make that same choice before they lose themselves entirely. You do not have to be hit to be hurt. You do not have to be yelled at to be diminished. Emotional erasure is real, and it can kill you just as surely as any physical violence. Choose yourself. Choose your own visibility. Choose life. Lowell read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Even in her deepest pain, even as she was planning her escape, Natalie had thought about other women suffering similar fates. She had transformed her pain into help for strangers. We have helped over 200 women in the past year, Simone said quietly. Women leaving emotionally abusive situations. Women who needed money for security deposits. Women who needed therapy. Women who needed legal help to change their names and disappear from partners who made them feel invisible. All because of your wife's donation and her bravery in naming what she experienced. She saved herself and saved others in the process, Lowell said, his voice breaking. Yes, Simone agreed. And I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to understand that her pain was not meaningless. She transformed it into something powerful. Simone paused, then added, I have been following your work. I have heard you speak about emotional neglect and masculine failure. I wanted to ask if you would be willing to work with our organization more formally. We need voices like yours. We need men who are willing to speak honestly about the harm they have caused, who can help other men recognize these patterns before they destroy their relationships. I will do whatever I can, Lowell said. It is the least I owe her. Over the following months, Lowell became more involved with organizations supporting survivors. He spoke at workshops, participated in training sessions for counselors, wrote articles about recognizing emotional abuse from the perspective of someone who had perpetrated it. His message was always the same: change is possible, but it requires complete honesty, consistent action, and the understanding that growth does not erase harm or entitle you to forgiveness. The work was difficult and often painful. He regularly spoke to rooms full of women who looked at him with justified anger and suspicion. He regularly heard stories that mirrored what he had done to Natalie. Stories of women who had made themselves invisible, trying to please partners who could not see them. After one particularly difficult workshop, where a woman had broken down crying while describing her husband's emotional neglect, another participant approached Lowell. "Thank you for not making yourself the hero," she said. "Thank you for owning what you did without asking us to feel sorry for you. That takes courage." "It is not courage," Lowell said. "It is honesty. Courage would have been treating my wife with the dignity she deserved while I still had the chance." One evening, as Lowell was preparing dinner in his small kitchen, his phone rang. It was Benjamin. "I need to tell you something," Benjamin said, his voice tight. "I heard from Natalie again. She wrote me a longer letter this time. She is doing really well, Lowell. She has built a whole new life. She has her own consulting business. She has friends. She's in a relationship with someone who treats her well." Lowell felt his chest tighten. "That is good. I am glad she is happy." "There is more," Benjamin said. "She asked me to tell you something. She said that what you did to her nearly destroyed her, but it did not. She said she used that pain as fuel to build something better. She said she thinks about you sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of sad wisdom. She understands now that you were broken too, that you hurt her because you did not know how not to hurt people. She said she hopes you have learned. And she said to tell you that if your change helps even one other woman leave before she loses herself completely, then maybe all of it meant something." "Did she say where she is?" Lowell asked. "No, and I would not tell you if she did," Benjamin said firmly. "She has built a life without you. She deserves to keep it." "I know," Lowell said. "I just wanted to hear that she is okay. That she is more than okay. That she's actually happy." "She is," Benjamin confirmed. "Happier than she ever was with you. And you need to let that be enough." After they hung up, Lowell sat in his dark apartment and let himself feel the full weight of what he had lost. Not just Natalie, but the possibility of her. The future they could have had if he had been brave enough to be present, open enough to be vulnerable, secure enough to let her fully exist beside him instead of in the shadows. But he also felt something else: gratitude. Gratitude that she had survived him. Gratitude that she had been strong enough to leave. Gratitude that she was building a life full of the visibility and love she had always deserved. He pulled out his journal and wrote one final letter to her, knowing she would never read it, but needing to write it anyway. "Dear Natalie, Benjamin told me you are happy. Truly happy. And I want you to know that makes me happier than anything else could. I want you to know that I understand now what I did to you, the full scope of the damage, the near destruction of your spirit. I want you to know that I am doing the work, not to win you back, because I understand that is impossible and wrong to want, but to ensure that no other woman suffers what you suffered. I want you to know that you were right to leave. Right to choose yourself. Right to build a life where I do not exist. I want you to know that I am grateful you survived me. That is my only wish for you now. That you continue to thrive, to be seen, to take up all the space you want without ever apologizing for existing. Thank you for loving me, even though I did not deserve it. Thank you for leaving when staying would have killed you. Thank you for being brave enough to choose yourself. I will carry you with me always, not as a fantasy of what I lost, but as a reminder of what matters and what I must never take for granted again." He closed the journal and sat in the quiet of his small apartment, alone, but no longer empty, carrying the weight of his failure, but also the possibility of becoming better. Chapter 9. The shattering of illusions. Lowell's mother called on a Tuesday evening, 18 months after Natalie had disappeared. Her voice on the phone was different than he had heard in months, harder, colder, carrying a weight that made his stomach clench with dread. "I need to see you," she said. "Tomorrow. There are things about Natalie you need to know. Things I have been keeping from you because I was not sure you were ready. But it is time. You need to understand the full truth of what you did to her." She gave him an address to a restaurant across town, a place he had never been, and hung up before he could ask questions. That night, Lowell barely slept, his mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. He arrived early, watching through the window as his mother pulled up in her car. She looked older than he remembered, worn down by secrets she had been carrying. When she entered the restaurant and sat across from him, she placed a thick envelope on the table between them without greeting, without warmth. "Open it," she said, her voice flat and lifeless. Inside were medical records, psychiatric evaluation forms, hospital admission papers, emergency room reports, all bearing Natalie's name, all from dates during their marriage that Lowell remembered as ordinary days, as normal stretches of time when nothing remarkable had happened. His hands shook as he read through the documents. Natalie had been hospitalized twice during their marriage for severe malnutrition and dehydration. The medical notes were clinical and devastating. Patient presents with symptoms consistent with severe stress response. Patient reports decreased food intake due to nausea associated with anxiety. Patient unable to maintain adequate hydration. Patient requires IV fluids and monitoring. The psychiatric evaluations were worse. Patient displays symptoms of acute depression. Patient reports dissociative episodes where she feels disconnected from her body and surroundings. Patient expresses feelings of worthlessness and invisibility. Patient states she sometimes forgets to eat because she does not feel real enough to need food. Patient reports suicidal ideation, but states she has not made concrete plans. Recommend intensive therapy and possible medication. She collapsed at the community center the first time, his mother said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. 6 months into your marriage, one of the volunteers called an ambulance. I got a call from the hospital because my number was listed as her emergency contact. You were traveling that week. Do you remember where you were? Lowell could not speak, could not remember, could only shake his head. I sat with her in that hospital room while they pumped her full of fluids because her body was shutting down from stress, his mother continued. I held her hand while she apologized to me for being a burden. She apologized, Lowell. She was in a hospital bed because living with you was destroying her body, and she apologized for inconveniencing me. His mother pulled out another folder. Inside were incident reports from his building's security staff, documents he had never known existed. These are security logs from your building, she said. Multiple incidents where neighbors called security because they could hear Natalie crying so loudly they thought someone was being hurt. 17 separate occasions over 3 years where security knocked on your door to check if she was safe. Most of these happened when you were traveling. A few happened when you were home, in your office, with the door closed, too absorbed in your work to hear your wife sobbing in the next room. Lowell read through the reports, each one a dagger to his chest. Incident on Tuesday evening. Neighbors report sounds of distress from unit. Security responded, spoke with Mrs. Browning, who stated she was fine and apologized for the noise. Mrs. Browning appeared to have been crying, but insisted no intervention was needed. No further action taken. There is more, his mother said, and she pulled out a letter. Natalie wrote this about 2 months before she left you. She gave it to me and told me to keep it sealed unless I felt you needed to see it. I kept it sealed because I was not sure you could handle it. Because I was not sure reading it would do anything except crush you. But you need to be crushed, Lowell. You need to understand exactly what you did. The letter was handwritten, the script jagged and desperate, so different from Natalie's usually careful penmanship. He read it with shaking hands. I'm writing this on a night when I stood in our bathroom holding pills, trying to calculate how many would be enough. Trying to decide if permanent disappearance would be easier than the slow disappearance happening in my marriage. I did not take them, but I wanted to. I stood there for almost an hour, and the only reason I did not swallow them is because I knew he would not notice I was gone until he needed something from me. That realization, that knowing, made me angrier than the loneliness does. Anger is better than despair. Anger kept me alive tonight. I will not forgive him for this. Not for the neglect, but for making me want to die in a house where I was supposed to be loved. For making me complicit in my own erasure until I was so small and so quiet that death seemed like just one more step toward the invisibility I was already living. Lowell could not breathe. The restaurant spun around him. He had not just neglected her. He had nearly killed her. She had stood in their bathroom contemplating suicide, and he had been somewhere in that same house, oblivious, unreachable, sealed off in his own world, while she teetered on the edge of ending her life. There is more, his mother said relentlessly. Natalie was seeing a trauma therapist for 2 years before she left. The therapist diagnosed her with complex emotional trauma. The diagnosis is right here in her records. Your wife had PTSD from living with you, Lowell, from your systematic emotional abuse. That is what the therapist called it, systematic emotional abuse. She pulled out more documents, forms from the therapist's office detailing treatment plans, progress notes, session summaries. Patient continues to struggle with sense of self. Patient reports feeling like she is disappearing. Patient has begun planning exit strategy as part of safety planning. Patient demonstrates increasing clarity that staying in current environment poses risk to her mental and physical health. The therapist helped her plan her escape, his mother said. Helped her understand that leaving was not weakness, but survival. Helped her save enough money, find resources, prepare for a life where you could never find her. His mother pulled out one final document, and this one made Lowell's blood run cold. It was a restraining order application, filled out in Natalie's handwriting, but never filed. The date was 2 months before she left. In the application, Natalie had detailed everything. The emotional isolation, the systematic dismissal of her needs, the way he had made her feel unsafe in her own home, not through physical violence, but through relentless emotional destruction. She described the dissociative episodes, the suicidal ideation, the physical manifestations of stress. She described feeling erased, made invisible, treated as though her existence was an inconvenience to be tolerated, rather than a life to be cherished. She filled this out, his mother said. She was ready to file it. But she chose not to because she believed you would paint yourself as the victim. She believed no one would understand that you can destroy someone without ever raising your hand. So she disappeared instead. She chose silence over justice because you had broken her so completely that she could not even fight for legal protection. Lowell stared at the documents spread across the table, a timeline of destruction he had caused while remaining completely oblivious. His mother was not finished. 2 months ago, Benjamin received a letter from her, his mother said. She is thriving now, Lowell. She has built a life where she is valued and seen. The letter included a photograph. She's standing on a beach, her arms raised in joy, her face radiating happiness you never gave her. She wrote to Benjamin that she thinks about her time with you as a dark chapter that taught her the most important lesson of her life. That she is worthy of being seen, and anyone who cannot see her does not deserve to be in her life. His mother gathered the documents, leaving only Natalie's letter on the table. Every day of your supposed transformation, she said, her voice like ice, every moment you have spent thinking you understood what you did, has been built on incomplete truth. You thought you neglected her. You nearly killed her. You thought she left because she was unhappy. She left because staying might have literally ended her life. You thought you could grow and change, and somehow that would matter. But it does not matter to her. She has moved on so completely that you are nothing but a cautionary tale she tells in therapy. a chapter she closed and locked and threw away the key to. His mother stood to leave, her eyes full of a contempt that would never fully disappear. "She wanted you to know all of this," she said. "Not as a gift, but as a final reckoning, so you would understand that you do not get to feel better about yourself. You do not get to claim redemption. You get to carry this truth for the rest of your life. You nearly destroyed a woman who loved you, and she had to save herself because you never would have saved her. That is who you were, and no amount of therapy or good deeds will ever change that fundamental fact." She walked out of the restaurant, and Lowell sat there surrounded by the wreckage of complete truth, understanding for the first time the real depths of what he had done. He had read the journal. He had seen the storage unit. But those revelations had been filtered through his own ability to process them, softened by his unconscious need to preserve some sense of himself as decent despite his failures. This was different. This was unfiltered truth. Medical records that showed her body failing under the stress of living with him. Psychiatric evaluations that labeled what he had done as abuse. A restraining order she had been too broken to file. A letter describing her contemplation of suicide, written in his home while he lived his life in another room. Unreachable and uncaring. He picked up the letter and read it again, forcing himself to see every word, to absorb every truth. She had stood in their bathroom holding pills. She had wanted to die. Because of him, because he had made her feel so invisible that death seemed like just another form of the disappearance she was already experiencing. The worst part was understanding that all his work, all his therapy, all his speaking and writing and attempts at becoming better had been built on a sanitized version of events. He had told himself he had been neglectful, emotionally unavailable, blind to her suffering. But those words were too soft, too easy. They let him maintain the fiction that he had been flawed but not monstrous. The truth was, he had abused her, systematically, profoundly. He had brought her to the brink of suicide through his relentless erasure of her humanity, and she had saved herself not through his awakening, which had come far too late, but through her own strength and the help of professionals who saw what he refused to see. Lowell left the restaurant and walked through the city for hours, the medical records clutched in his hand, his mind unable to process the magnitude of what he now knew. When he finally returned to his apartment, he called Dr. Hayes and told her everything. "I need you to understand something," Dr. Hayes said, after listening to his confession. "This information does not undo the work you have done, but it does deepen your understanding of what that work is for. You do not get to feel redeemed. You never will. But you can take this complete truth and use it to help others understand the real stakes of emotional neglect. This is not about being a little more present. This is life and death. Women die from this, Lowell. Maybe not always literally, but they die inside. And you need to make sure people understand that." That night, Lowell rewrote everything he had been saying in his talks and workshops. He stripped away any remaining softness, any implicit suggestion that emotional neglect was a manageable flaw rather than a potentially fatal form of abuse. He wrote about the medical records, the psychiatric evaluations, the contemplated suicide. He wrote about how close he had come to having his wife's death on his conscience, and he understood with devastating clarity that he would never be free of this, that this knowledge would sit in his chest for the rest of his life, a weight he would carry every day. His mother was right. He did not get redemption. He only got to live with what he had done. Chapter 10. The Legacy. 5 years had passed since Natalie had disappeared from Lowell's life, and the world had changed in ways both visible and invisible. Lowell was older now, grayer, carrying the weight of his past, not as a burden that crushed him, but as a responsibility that shaped every choice he made. The foundation he had built had grown beyond anything he had imagined. They had helped over 800 women leave emotionally abusive marriages, providing resources, therapy, legal assistance, and the practical support needed to rebuild lives. The foundation bore no name that referenced him. It was simply called the Visibility Project, a name inspired by Natalie's own words about what she had lost and what she had reclaimed. Lowell no longer spoke about his own redemption because he understood there was no such thing. Instead, he spoke about accountability, about the lifelong work of becoming better, about how transformation is not a destination but a daily practice. His talks had evolved over the years, becoming more nuanced, more focused on helping men understand the subtle ways they disappear their partners through 1,000 small acts of dismissal. He had trained a new generation of facilitators for the men's support groups, teaching them how to create space for honest reckoning without letting men off the hook with easy absolution. The groups had expanded to multiple cities, each one following the same principles: brutal honesty, no redemption narratives, focus on prevention rather than personal salvation. His relationship with his family had settled into something sustainable. His mother was elderly now, her health declining, but they had reached a peace that honored both the love between them and the disappointment she would always carry. They spent time together regularly, and sometimes she would tell him she was proud of the work he was doing, even if she could never fully forgive what had necessitated it. Benjamin was thriving. He had become a successful architect, married with a child on the way. His designs won awards for their accessibility and beauty, buildings that accommodated bodies like his while remaining elegant. He and Lowell had dinner monthly, and Benjamin would sometimes share updates from Natalie, who still wrote to him occasionally. She never asked about Lowell, and Benjamin never volunteered information. They existed in each other's lives as distant memories, ghosts of people they used to be. One afternoon, Lowell received a call from Dr. Hayes. She was retiring after decades of practice, and she wanted to meet with him one last time. They sat in her office, the same room where he had begun his journey of genuine change 5 years earlier. The books on the shelves looked more worn now, or perhaps he simply saw them more clearly. "I wanted to tell you that I am proud of the work you have done," Dr. Hayes said. "When you first came to me, I was not sure you were capable of real change. I have seen too many men perform transformation without embodying it. But you have done the work. You have become different." "I do not feel different," Lowell admitted. "I still carry everything I did to her. Every day." "Good," Dr. Hayes said firmly. "The day you stop carrying it is the day you stop being accountable. Your past is not something to overcome. It is something to integrate and learn from continuously. You understand that now. That is why your work has impact." She handed him a folder. Inside were letters from women who had attended his workshops, women who had found the courage to leave after hearing him speak, women who had recognized the patterns in their own marriages and chosen themselves before it was too late. "These women wanted you to know that your honesty saved them," Dr. Hayes said. "Not because you are redeemed, but because seeing the face of someone who caused harm and hearing him take full responsibility gave them permission to trust their own instincts about what they were experiencing." Lowell read through the letters, tears streaming down his face. One woman wrote, "I heard you speak and realized my husband was doing to me exactly what you did to your wife. But I heard you early enough to leave before I disappeared completely. I'm rebuilding my life now. Thank you for being honest about your failure. It saved me." Another wrote, "My husband attended your workshop. He came home and apologized to me for the first time in our marriage. Real apology, not performance. He is in therapy now. He is trying. I do not know if we will make it, but at least he finally sees me. At least I am not invisible anymore. This is the legacy," Dr. Hayes said. "Not redemption, but prevention. Not absolution, but impact. This is what you do with harm you cannot undo. You prevent it from happening to others." After leaving Dr. Hayes's office, Lowell walked through the city, past the places he used to know when he was a different man living a different life. He passed the estate where he had once lived with Natalie, now owned by another family, their children playing in the yard where Natalie had once sat alone. He passed the community center where she had volunteered, where women still gathered to support each other. Her presence still felt in the programs she had helped build. He walked to the storage facility, where he had once found her hidden hopes and dreams. The unit was long since cleared out, but he still had the key, carried it in his pocket as a reminder. He stood outside the building and thought about the woman who had carefully boxed up her life, who had documented every moment of love and loss, who had left evidence of her existence because some part of her needed to know that someone would eventually see what had been invisible. That evening, Lowell attended a foundation event honoring the women who had rebuilt their lives after leaving abusive situations. The room was filled with survivors, with advocates, with therapists and lawyers, and friends who had helped women escape. Lowell stood at the back, watching, not part of the celebration but witness to it. One woman, a survivor who had become an advocate herself, took the microphone to speak. 5 years ago, she said, I was disappearing in my marriage. I felt invisible, unreal, like I might evaporate entirely if I stayed one more day. Then I attended a workshop where a man spoke about the harm he had caused his own wife through emotional neglect. He did not ask for sympathy. He did not center himself. He just told the truth. And that truth gave me permission to name what was happening to me. I left my marriage that month. I rebuilt my life, and now I stand here visible and real and whole because someone was brave enough to be honest about his own failure. The woman paused, her eyes scanning the room. They landed on Lowell at the back, and she nodded in acknowledgement before continuing. Transformation is not about the person who caused harm becoming a hero. It is about them becoming useful. It is about them taking their worst mistakes and turning them into warnings, into lessons, into resources for people who are suffering the same harm. That is what real accountability looks like. After the event, as people were leaving, Benjamin approached Lowell with an expression that was both sad and hopeful. Natalie wrote to me again, Benjamin said. She wanted me to tell you something. She heard about the foundation. She knows about the work you are doing. She said she is glad. She said she hoped her pain would transform into something that helped others, and it has. She wanted you to know that while she will never be part of your life again, she respects what you have built from the wreckage of your failure. Is she happy? Lowell asked the same question he always asked. She is engaged, Benjamin said gently, to someone who sees her. Really sees her. She's getting married next summer. She has built a beautiful life. She wanted me to tell you that so you would know she is not just surviving. She is thriving in ways she never thought possible. Lowell felt tears on his face, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude. She had not just survived him. She had transcended what he had done to her. She had built a life so full and rich that his memory was nothing but a distant shadow. Thank her for me, Lowell said. Tell her I'm grateful she survived. Tell her I'm grateful she is loved the way she always deserved. That night, Lowell sat in his apartment and wrote a final entry in the journal he had kept for the past 5 years. Natalie is getting married to someone who sees her, someone who values her, someone who makes her feel visible and real and cherished. This is the best possible ending to our story. Not reunion, but her happiness. Not my redemption, but her freedom. I will carry what I did to her for the rest of my life, but I will carry it as fuel for preventing others from causing the same harm. She transformed her pain into help for others. I'm transforming my failure into warnings for men who might otherwise destroy their partners the way I destroyed her. This is what love looks like after harm. Not reconciliation, but her thriving in a life I am not part of. I am grateful. I am changed. I am accountable. And she is free. He closed the journal and looked around his small apartment. At the walls decorated with letters from survivors, at the photographs from foundation events, at the evidence of a life rebuilt from ashes, not into glory, but into usefulness. The story did not end with redemption. It ended with responsibility. With a woman who had nearly been destroyed by emotional neglect, rebuilding herself into someone radiant and whole. with a man who had caused that destruction, dedicating his remaining years to preventing it from happening to others. With understanding that love, after harm, sometimes looks like letting someone be happy in a life that does not include you. Lowell would live the rest of his life carrying what he had done, using it to help others, never claiming to be healed or redeemed, just working, witnessing, remembering, and somewhere in a life he would never touch. Natalie would walk down an aisle toward someone who saw her, would build a family with someone who valued her, would live in fullness and visibility and joy. That was enough. That was everything. That was the only ending that mattered.